Hey folks, MangaMatt here, and this time, for reals y'all, is the April manga update. I know this is again back from the other locale, but I was doing there was a bit of a renovation. I was doing a bit of work in there, and so I thought I'd fall back on old reliable here and just put something out again, because the way I was seeing it is either do it now or it's gonna be several days later, and I chose the former. So all right, here we go. Attack on Titan, Volume 18. On the one hand, I kind of wish that I would get. Part of me wants to just get the special edition versions of Attack on Titan with the dust jackets on them, but then part of me is kind of like, I don't know, because it's like none of the other ones have dust jackets on them. It'll feel kind of out of place, and I don't know. I still like the covers that they do for them anyway. It is neat though that they have that, especially because they're all American artists that are doing the covers for these Attack on Titans recently. So in this volume, we definitely get the Survey Corps team finally going and sealing up the hole in Wall Maria, and we also get plenty of backstory about Aaron's father and more of what kind of his origin is in this series, and then kind of a big climactic showdown we're gonna get with Aaron versus the Armor Titan, and also the Beast Titan showing up too. So two of the unique Titans showing up to lay havoc. Then let's see, 7 Deadly Sins, Volume 13, which concludes the current arc of Deadly Sins here with against their main antagonist Hendrickson. That fight's all but over basically, and you get to see kind of the aftermath and sort of the reassembling of the 6 of the 7 Deadly Sins. They're still waiting for that final Deadly Sin to show up, and now for whoever would be the new final the new threat that they present. I mean, there's already a lot of things going on here, especially with King versus Bond, and a lot of tension going on there with King and Bond, given that King is kind of the sort of lord of the fairy kingdom, and Bond himself has had a lot of history with people from there. So it's still interesting. Next up, we have Tsubasa World Chronicle Volume 2, Niraikanai, with Shaoran and the gang dealing with the weird kind of world in Niraikanai where apparently Shaoran is seeing things different from Fuma and Phi, and especially this one woman that is also seeing kind of Li Shaoran is seeing kind of a blending of the two, whereas the other guys are seeing like strictly one way or another, with kind of how things are being presented, and with no, not Fuma, Kurogane and Phi, who think that everything looks like a threat, and whereas Li Shaoran is seeing that everything looks peaceful and stuff, and so it's messing with their heads more or less, and also you're seeing what kind of these treasures that Watanuki gave the team may actually hold as a sort of trump card to kind of fix that mess. Then this has been a while. It's been about a year, I think, since the last volume of this came out. But here it is. We get we get here Air Gear volume. Yeah, we get Air Gear volume 34, which this makes now 3 more volumes till Air Gear's over. This was a pretty neat volume, I thought, specifically with Kaz facing off against Nike, who Nike is basically just just pure destruction, and you finally see Kaz or Kazu kind of finally fully embrace the Flame Road, and kind of how that ability would sort of is interlinked to kind of every other road, because fire is kind of this sort of primal element, and it's explained that kind of every other road borrows something from the Flame Road, and so by that token that the Flame Road can essentially borrow bits from the other roads. It's a pretty interesting kind of explanation. It's always interesting when I see like manga creators that do kind of that sort of thing with their characters and present kind of a weird, unique kind of explanation for how they get out of a situation or something. Then next up we get Food Wars Volume 11, which is the showdown between Mimasaka and Soma in cooking beef stew, which was fairly entertaining, and I kind of wish that the ending actually featured in it a recipe for the said beef stew. But you know, what are you gonna do? I guess that was the one instance they decided not to include a recipe for the titular meals. I'm trying to find. I want to say they didn't. No, they didn't. They missed the beef stew. I love beef stew. Why would they not include the recipe for that? I'm a little But then we also have I also like the next part with what's his name, the Spice Guy versus Akira versus what's his name, the guy, the sort of more serious kind of heated up guy right here, who uses like lots of kind of high intensity sort of ingredients, and I like the fact that they do that part entirely like a Yu-Gi-Oh card game, which sort of plays up the over the top silliness that makes Food Wars so much fun for me. Then let's see here, Assassination Classroom Volume 9, which features the final showdown with what's his name guy, who was originally trying to take down the whole class, who was the former teacher guy. That was a pretty interesting fight, especially the explanation to how he takes the guy down with this weird kind of technique that he wasn't expecting. Then after that, there's kind of this Valentine's romance story, which is it feels kind of like one of those filler things until you see that apparently there's a new sort of assassin player in town. Saw him kind of earlier in the series, who just goes by the name of Death, because all who approach him, die. And then also an interesting kind of character focus on one particular student who was actually sent over from a regular class and to be in Kuro Sensei's class. What's his name? Takebayashi, who looks kind of like this sort of meekly kind of nerdy guy. He actually kind of reminds me of Joe from the first Digimon series, but it focuses on him and kind of how there's a lot of this pressure for him to perform well because of the success of all of his other brothers and family members, and sort of how Kuro Sensei sort of goes in and sort of inspires a little bit of confidence in him, and makes him ultimately makes him want to stay in Class F. See, next up we had I previously read these and talked about them, but I was borrowing a friend's copy at the time, so I felt that since I already had all of his other works, I should get this too. And this is the What a Wonderful World, volumes 1 and 2 for Inio Asano. These are essentially just a collection of short stories that do kind of have a connecting theme by the end, mostly about just kind of people who kind of don't embrace life, or embrace a lot of elements in life that they're currently living, and something comes along that kind of gives them a reaffirmation of kind of those things that they initially enjoyed about life, but then finally wanted to enjoy more about it. It's a lot of interesting sort of stories, and I think it's a lot of fun, especially for if a person doesn't want to get like a lot of the big, long Inio Asano stories. You know, What a Wonderful World gives you a lot of neat little snippet stories that are a lot more easily digested and a lot more fun in those terms for some of those readers. Next up, Real, Volume 14. You know, more wheelchair basketball, and this one definitely doesn't disappoint, especially with the conclusion of the last volume, when the wrestler guy performed in the ring, and now he's trying to keep working at his rehabilitation. And then also, while that's going on, it seems that there's been a technicality with one of the main basketball team, where initially they thought that they weren't going to qualify, but because one of the teams couldn't make it to the final, to the next tier in the brackets, that their team actually were the next qualifiers, and so they're actually going to make it. So you actually get a neat sort of like kind of aha moment for a lot of the characters, as they realize that, you know, they still have a shot at getting that at going further in the wheelchair basketball championships. And also this incredibly heartbreaking story of one of the characters who early in the series was a player on the team, but because he suffers from what's commonly referred to as Gehrigs Disease, his body just keeps becoming more and more deteriorated as time goes on. Where at the beginning of the series he couldn't move from the chest down. He still had use of his arms and his head. He now is unable to even breathe on his own. He needs a respirator. He needs lots of medicine and a lot of other things to keep his body going. And you know, you really get a sense of feeling for how he initially was mortified about it, and then how he kind of finds a way to keep going even after that. It's really a lot. I really enjoy Real a lot. It's a lot of fun. I wish you know, it and Vagabond would come out more often. Takehiko Inoue, he just always does. He knows just how to do a lot of really great action with a lot of great characters that are easy to identify and feel very very natural in the way they talk and act. You know, and you never get the feeling that he's just creating multiples of the same character in a series. See, next up, I Am a Hero, Omnibus 1. This collects volumes 1 and 2 of I Am a Hero. This was a big deal when it was coming out back in 2009, I believe, was when this originally was published, the first and second volumes here. Yeah, 2009 when this was hitting, and you know, it was still a big deal for a lot of zombie fans were clamoring at it as sort of like you know, a better zombie manga series versus say like you know, High School of the Dead. Now I enjoy it. I especially enjoy the main character. What's his name? Kengo. No, Kengo's the author. I'm sorry. What's his name? I always forget a lot of these character names. You know, it's part of just being not from Japan. They don't sink in as well. No, but the main guy, he's kind of a manga artist, and you get a sense of kind of where he's coming from with a lot of his feelings and stuff about the manga industry, and sometimes that comes off a little preachy. The first volume and the second volume have almost no zombies in it, so it's definitely one of those that you have to be in it for the long haul to truly enjoy. I'm glad that they released it like this, because I can only imagine what somebody would be like trying to read this expecting zombie action in the first volume and then nothing, and then you know, just completely disappointed in it. But you know, if I didn't know about the hype and the interest that people had in it, I probably wouldn't have picked it up from the first impressions of it. I would have loved to see what people were thinking when the chapters were coming out. Just this story called I Am a Hero, where you have a manga creator who's going through life and he's getting crapped on by people, and then it's like, I don't know, a few volumes later it turns out to be a zombie fiction after all. It's like, oh, that happened. But regardless, I think the artwork is very good, and it's very creepy. The zombies are a little bit more different. They actually speak, and they're a little more like contorted and gnarled and like that. So I you know, I think it's good there. All right, next up we have Ludwig B, volumes 1 and 2. These are also Kickstarter funded Osamu Tezuka works. This is referred to as Tezuka's last unfinished masterpiece. You know, I don't know how accurate I would necessarily refer to that. I think that I don't know. It's, you know, I guess in terms of like it being an unfinished work, you know, there's that. I would definitely say that Phoenix was probably technically his unfinished masterpiece, but it could be argued that since each installment of Phoenix was a complete self-contained story, that, you know, even if he died before he finished all the volumes of it that he actually wanted, that, you know, in a sense he didn't leave, like, he didn't, like, you know, pass away during the middle of something or another, whereas in Ludwig B it does in fact end sort of unfinished in a sense. You get you know, a moment with where Ludwig, well, all right, let me start at the beginning here. So Ludwig B is essentially a biographical story of Ludwig von Beethoven, who is a world-renowned and historically significant music composer. I'm sure those of you that may not have ever even heard of him have at least heard of some of his symphonies and other works of music used in movies and commercials and shows and everything. It's ubiquitous, and this is the story of kind of his upbringing and eventually his rise as a full-time concert pianist who would work underneath monarchies or you know, other royalties of the time. You know, I thought it was very entertaining. There are some things about it that I did find kind of jarring. You know, it's another trait of Tezuka to always kind of add these elements to things, even when you know, he could by all rights have just done a straight up adaptation. Probably the most jarring being the opening few pages right here, where we see what's his name, what's his name, Franz here, who is a small boy who essentially grows up to be this sort of terrible irate aristocrat, and he just has a burning hatred for a nobleman, Franz Kruzstein, who I believe Franz Kruzstein was a real person, but in here he's depicted as having this absolutely unhealthy obsession with the name Ludwig, all because of his mother who died as a result of a peacock that flew into the window and scared her into a heart attack, and she passed out dead. And as a result, Franz's father has always told him that you know, as always, that damn Ludwig, who if he'd just not got rid of that, if he'd got rid of that stupid peacock, you know, my wife would have still been alive, and all of that sort of thing. Well, no, Ludwig was the name of the peacock. Ludwig is the name of a peacock, and it flew into Franz's mother's room while she was in labor and gave her a heart attack and killed her. And the father then spent his entire youth beating him and making him absolutely hate the name the name Ludwig. And this is the driving force behind why Franz is a dick to Ludwig Beethoven in the series. And frankly, I think it's kind of silly, and it just, the whole time I'm reading, it just doesn't feel like a strong enough motivator for, like, if, like, it'd be one thing if he just didn't like names. He just despises anything named Ludwig. He even hates, like later he's with a lady and finds out that her horse is named Ludwig, and he purposefully makes the horse drink poison just to kill the horse because he hates the name. It's so over the top and crazy, and especially given that the background of this is supposed to be of a actual event here. Also, I didn't notice this before, but that these are kind of mirrored on the sense here. The most interesting thing being that, of course, I think here Ludwig is playing on a harpsichord, and here I believe he is playing on an actual piano, as they mention in here that just prior to the piano there was sort of a precursor to a piano, which was a harpsichord, which actually all of the, if you want to get like super nerdy, I guess you could say that any piece of sheet music before Beethoven's time cannot be properly heard or appreciated if it is not performed on a harpsichord, because that's the instrument that the composers intended for their works to be played on. And by extension, I guess you could say that they don't, in that sense, sound quite right. But regardless, I like Ludwig B. it's definitely, you definitely see all of Tezuka's best art styles, all of his best artwork. He's definitely the most matured here. We get you know, it looks as good as like Message to Adolf or something like that. There's still a bit of the corniness in there. You still always get these moments where he's experimenting with a lot of the panel layouts, where you know, the doctor here is running back and forth trying to give CPR to the new child and the mother, and he himself is actually getting winded trying to revive both of them. Little stuff like that. But again, if the villain was better motivated, and you know, if it wasn't for that, I really would enjoy every aspect of this. But you know, a hero's only as good as his villain, and in some cases, I don't even know if Ludwig having a villain is even necessary. I mean, it's a biography. You know, I guess it kind of has to. I don't know. Like, if you watch the movie Amadeus, you know, you clearly saw a rivalry between Salieri and Mozart, even though you know, historically Salieri's and Mozart were very friendly rivals and never had any long-standing bitterness between each other that can be accounted for in anything historically. But of course, that doesn't make for good storytelling. You know, it's more fun when there's some kind of like drama and angst in there. So I mean, I guess I can't necessarily fault it. I will say, however, that speaking of Amadeus, it's certainly not a coincidence that Ludwig B did come out a few years after the movie Amadeus came out, and it does just so happen that Amadeus Mozart does have a very strong resemblance to the look of Amadeus from the movie of the same name, and also his mannerisms of him being sort of an aloof genius that never really took his work seriously, which again, that's strictly made up for the movie. Everything you would read would suggest that Mozart worked very hard and tirelessly to perfect his work and music, and he was never just some kind of slouching, you know, listless prodigy that just sort of accidentally or nonchalantly spit out works of great appreciation or something. So that's, at least you can see some influence, some outside influence in that for it, which is pretty fun, I think. Then next up we get Toriko, Volume 33. Following them acquiring air, they're now on their way to get the soup, which is called pear. Not because necessarily because it would kind of help recover the gourmet world, but actually because Komatsu suffers a traumatic blow to the chest, basically ripping out his heart, delivered by a former friend of theirs, and they're doing everything they can to basically keep Komatsu on life support, but he needs a new heart, and the only thing that can recover it is happens to be the next course on the meal of Acacia's full meal, which is pear, and it actually leads them to Area 7, which is a very interesting kind of world where, first of all, everything's gigantic, even plants and stuff, and also there is a strict rule in place for animals to stick only to their food chain. They never stray from it. It's all enforced by the area's one of the 8 kings that rules that area. This monkey creature, and it just so happens too that Toriko and the gang arrive here, and they find that all of the monkeys that serve under the Monkey King are 100% loyal to him, and will just tear anyone apart that breaks the balance of the food chain. And it's actually shown that the food chain is put in place as sort of a oppressive device to make sure that all the good food is kept for the Monkey King and all of his high-ranking lieutenants and stuff, and everybody else kind of just suffers for it. It's a very neat kind of idea of essentially a totalitarian ecosystem food chain, which I'd never actually heard of that, and I think it's pretty neat to see, especially with all the fun stuff he does with the different monkeys in here. I'll be definitely looking forward to seeing what he does with that. And then, I bashed on it last time, but but after watching the anime adaptation that came for it, I went back and got a couple more of the volumes, and I can say that Pandora in the Crimson Shell Ghost Urn I do find it actually enjoyable in some ways. Initially, I was thrown off because of the whole, the access port to the one girl's abilities is essentially right at her crotch area, and that was like a big thing I had to deal with. But following that, in the next volume and on, it's not as prevalent anymore, and there's a lot more of this lighthearted fun, especially with the main girl, with what's her name, Nene, and her budding relationship with Clarion, the cat-eared android, and sort of how they play off each other, which is very fun because Nene is of course very energetic and fun, and Clarion is very deadpan robot, and at the same time they kind of need each other because she's an adapter and is able to fully integrate with whatever program is pulled from the Pandora box hardware that's wired into Clarion, and they use it to kind of solve problems and stuff, or do other kind of odd things. It's definitely a fun kind of world, and you definitely see a lot of Rikto Koshi's humor shine through in it, which was the same thing kind of what happened in XL Saga. The first volume is practically unreadable, but then once you get past it and you get everything set up for the setting and characters and everything, you can insert the humor in it as you need, and it actually come out really fun and enjoyable. So I'm actually going to read a little more of it to try and see if it delivers the way that XL Saga delivered, or if it's gonna fizzle out or something, or if he's just gonna Rikto Koshi's just going to work on it when he feels like working on it, which is again kind of like he did with XL Saga. So the only other thing to note here, which I always forget to bring this up, and I'm gonna at least try to remedy that here, but I do in fact get manga on my Kindle reader to do what else but read, and so here's like a little update from some of the ones that I've gotten there. Here we get it's hard for you to see. I don't know how else to really show it or anything, but I've again gotten One Punch Man 5 through 8, which brings me up to date with One Punch Man. Really fun series, love it a lot. If you're a big fan of like superhero action with a bit of satire in there, I definitely love Saitama. He's so like nonchalant about the fact that he's so completely overpowered. It's hilarious. And then also here, Fort of Apocalypse volumes 1 through 10, which is the whole series put out by Kodansha Comics, which they actually have a few digital only manga series out. But Fort of Apocalypse is essentially it's another zombie apocalypse series with the group of boys who are sent to juvie, and the outbreak happens, and they have to get out and try and not only get supplies and defend themselves, but then they kind of find out what's going on with the outbreak and try to find someone who they think can create a remedy for what's going on. I definitely liked it, at least for the very different way that they presented the zombie creatures in this series, where basically they work on kind of a hierarchy system. There's the normal zombies, and then there's also like these weird dog zombies that have human faces, and then above those is essentially like this leader called a Bakor, and they have like three pupils in their eyes. They have no genitalia. They're really freaky, and they kind of have this pale face and long hair, and they can essentially command the zombies around them. Like the one guy essentially forms like this giant mass of zombies, and he rests atop it on like this kind of chair made of zombies, and he just kind of waltzes around. He kind of just parades himself around the area, and they have to try and take out these Bakors, because they can not only summon more of them, but when they summon the zombies, then they start moving faster and with more ferocity. So they're definitely the worst things to encounter, and they're also virtually unkillable. They completely regenerate within minutes, and they're a mess to try and fight. So there's some interesting things going on there, and again, it's only 10 volumes. It's not like they like drag it out or anything. I think it lasted just long enough, or maybe just a little bit too long, but that's kind of okay too. And then the last one here, Space Brothers, which I've only read up into volume 7 of it. There's currently 20 of them out now, and it's currently stopped at, I believe, 30, or no, I think it is technically still ongoing actually. But it's essentially the story of two brothers. The younger brother, both of them were obsessed with space travel ever since they were kids, and upon growing up, the younger brother actually became an astronaut, and the older brother has now decided that he wants to enlist in the space program and follow in the steps of his younger brother to become an astronaut. And the first maybe like 5 volumes is all about the older brother going through these rigorous tests and trials to become an astronaut in this very tight selection process. And then now I'm in volume 7, and now he's the younger brother has finally been launched into space as one of the first, as one of a very few Japanese citizens who have become astronauts, and he's actually going to be the first Japanese astronaut to land on the moon, which is of course a big deal for the whole nation. So that's where I'm at. It's a lot of fun. If you liked Twin Spica, it's not quite as angsty as that. There's definitely a lot more humor in it, but you also get a lot more feeling from these characters. Like you just kind of feel their passion and why they love space and why it fascinates them, and then you become passionate about space too, sort of drawing off of them. And there's all kinds of quirky, eccentric characters, and it's just really a lot of fun to read, and I love it to death. It's definitely the #1 thing to pick up on your e-reader for manga series. Anyway, that's all I got for this month, and I'll again check you next month. Thanks.